welcome back to the deep dive. Today's deep dive, well, this one's for you if you're a philosopher,
Oh.
because we're going to be diving deep into the ethics of René Descartes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I know you might be thinking, Descartes, ethics? I thought he was all about metaphysics and epistemology.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, you're right. Those are his most famous areas.
Yeah.
But we've got some excerpts here from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy entry on Descartes' ethics. And there's actually a lot there.
There really is.
Yeah. And it's often overlooked.
Yeah. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because Descartes thought that philosophy was like a kind of therapy, a path to true health of the mind. And get this, he considered ethics to be like the ultimate fruit of philosophy.
Really?
Yeah.
So this isn't just like some dusty, abstract ethical theory.
Yeah, not at all.
This is like deeply connected to how we live a good life.
Exactly.
Life of like contentment and tranquility.
Yes.
Like he's saying,
Yeah.
hey, philosophy isn't just about all these heady concepts.
Right.
It's about how to live well.
Yeah, and that's where it gets really interesting because he compares vices to diseases of the mind, and philosophy, particularly ethics, is like the cure.
Huh.
He even uses this image of a tree of philosophy. So metaphysics and physics are the roots and trunk.
Okay.
They're essential but foundational.
Yeah.
And the fruit, the aim, is morals. That was his word for ethics.
I love that imagery.
Yeah.
It shows how central ethics was to his whole project.
Exactly.
It's like you can't have a healthy tree without good fruit.
Right.
And you can't have a good life without ethics.
Exactly. And speaking of frameworks, we should talk about Descartes' provisional moral code from his discourse on the method.
Oh, yeah. I wanted to ask about that
Yeah.
because it seems kind of odd for a philosopher who's all about doubting everything.
I know, right?
It's like, wait, Descartes is telling us to just follow the rules.
I know, it doesn't sound like him at all.
That's not the Descartes I know.
Well, here's the thing. Those rules were meant to be temporary.
Yeah.
It was more like a practical guide for living while he was on this quest to find certain knowledge.
So like while he's figuring out the big stuff, he's like, okay, for now, I'm just going to stick with what's familiar.
Exactly. It was more strategic than a heartfelt endorsement of societal norms.
So he wasn't saying that these rules were good or true.
No, he was saying that they were a stable framework while there was uncertainty.
I see.
He was living in a time of huge intellectual and social upheaval.
Yeah.
So it makes sense that he needed some kind of anchor while he was figuring everything out.
It is interesting, though, right? This huge doubter conforming to tradition,
I know, it's funny.
at least for a little while.
That's a funny tension.
Yeah. I wonder what people thought about that back then, this provisional morality.
Oh, yeah. It caused a huge stir.
I bet.
But to really get why he did it, we have to see it in the big picture.
Yeah.
It wasn't about blind obedience. It was about creating space for intellectual exploration.
Okay, so the first rule was about conforming. What about the other rules in his code?
Yeah.
Did they hint at his ethical ideas?
Let's see. The second rule was to be firm and decisive in your actions, even when you don't know the right way.
Okay.
He thought that it was better to act based on your best judgment rather than just getting lost in doubt.
So, like, we don't always have perfect knowledge in the real world. We
Exactly.
have to act even if we're not 100% sure.
That's what he thought it was about, choosing something and sticking with it. Not because you're stubborn, but because wavering can be paralyzing.
Yeah, it can be.
So very practical, almost stoic.
Yeah.
And actually that leads into the third rule. Master yourself rather than trying to master fortune.
Oh,
Yeah, this is where we see the emphasis on what we can control,
okay.
our thoughts, desires, reactions,
Right.
instead of being at the mercy of events.
But he's saying that true happiness comes from inside,
Yes,
from building a strong inner self that can handle anything.
exactly. And then we get to the fourth rule, which actually ties back to philosophy as a path to well-being.
Okay.
This rule was to dedicate his life to cultivating reason and seeking truth. And he actually said that he found extreme contentment in doing this.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Now, I know the meditations are usually seen as an epistemological work,
Right.
but didn't he also talk about the role of the will there?
You're right, he did.
And that's pretty relevant for ethics.
Yes, very good point. The meditations might be about certainty and knowledge, but it also shows how Descartes understood the will, which is essential for ethical action.
So how did he connect the meditations with the will?
Well, for Descartes, the will was a powerful force, responsible for both belief and action.
Okay.
He thought it had this huge freedom, to choose between options. But this is important. He also thought that this freedom could lead us astray
Oh.
if it wasn't guided by a clear and distinct perception of what was true and good.
So it's not enough to just have free will.
No.
We have to use it wisely.
Exactly, guided by reason and understanding what's valuable.
So we have to apply that same standard to moral choices as we do to beliefs about the world.
Yes.
That seems hard.
It is a high bar, and I think that's why his later writings and his correspondence with Princess Elizabeth are so important.
Okay.
They really flesh out how to live virtuously, even when things aren't clear.
So this is where we see how it works in real life.
Exactly. How do you take these ideas about reason and will and actually use them to make good choices in the real world?
Yeah, good question.
Yeah. And you'll see how his conversations with Elizabeth offer some really interesting guidance on that.
Okay. I'm excited to hear more about that.
Yeah. Yeah, so Descartes' correspondence with Princess Elizabeth is amazing. It's like a goldmine for figuring out how his ethical thought developed.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it's filled with all these exchanges back and forth about all kinds of topics, like the nature of happiness, the role of reason,
Okay.
taming our passions.
It's like we're right there listening in
I know, it's so cool.
on these amazing conversations.
And you know what's so interesting is that Elizabeth was struggling with illness,
Oh, yeah.
personal hardships, and it just makes their discussions about finding contentment and peace of mind so real and relatable, you know?
Yeah, for sure.
Because we've all been there.
It makes it feel so much more human.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what makes this correspondence so valuable.
Yeah.
Because Elizabeth wasn't just like sitting there listening to Descartes.
Right.
She was pushing back, you know,
Oh, wow.
challenging him, making him clarify his thinking.
It's like she's one of us,
I know.
just like asking all the tough questions.
Yes, exactly. Like, how do you live a good life when things are tough?
It's the perfect example of how good philosophical dialogue can lead to new ideas,
Yes, even for someone like Descartes.
who had already done so much.
Exactly. So what kind of guidance did he offer Elizabeth on how to deal with like difficult emotions?
Yeah.
You know, those passions that can mess with your inner peace.
Well, actually, I was going to ask about that,
Oh, yeah.
because I know he had this two-part remedy.
You're right, he did, and it's actually pretty relevant even today. The first part is all about redirecting your imagination and senses
Oh,
away from the things that trigger those bad feelings.
so like if you're feeling anxious,
Yeah,
you try to focus on something positive.
exactly.
It's like early cognitive therapy or something.
I know, right? Like centuries before modern psychology.
Descartes was already saying that we can control our attention.
It's true, and that we can choose to focus on certain thoughts and experiences to change how we feel.
I like that.
He even told this story about how he got over an illness as a child.
Really?
Yeah, by just having a positive attitude.
That's so interesting.
It really shows how powerful the mind can be over the body.
Wow.
Yeah.
But distraction is just one part, right?
You're right. It
Oh,
is.
yeah.
There's a second part, too.
What's that?
This is where it gets philosophical.
Okay.
He said we should use our intellect,
Okay.
our reason,
Uh-huh.
to analyze those tough passions.
So it's not just about avoiding what makes you feel bad.
Right.
It's about understanding it.
Yes. Breaking it down, figuring out where it comes from.
Descartes thought we could understand the nature and causes of our passions
He did.
through reason.
Yes, and then we could master them,
Okay.
prevent them from controlling us.
So it's redirecting our attention
Yes.
and then understanding our emotions.
Exactly. And it all comes back to using reason to guide our lives.
Right. Like
Yeah.
philosophy is a path to true health of the mind.
That's it. Now, you mentioned earlier how some ancient philosophers thought that virtue and happiness were the same thing. Descartes had a different view, right?
Yeah, he made distinctions between the supreme good happiness and the final end.
He did.
That's where I get a little lost.
Oh, yeah. It can be confusing.
Yeah. How did he define those terms and how are they connected?
Okay, so let's break it down.
Okay.
For Descartes, the supreme good is virtue, straight up.
Okay.
And he defines virtue as a firm and constant will to bring about everything we judge to be the best
Okay.
and to employ all the force of our intellect in judging well.
So virtue is about doing what reason says is best,
Yes.
using your intellect to figure out what's good, and then doing it.
Exactly. Judgment and commitment.
Happiness for Descartes is what? Perfect contentment of mind and inner satisfaction.
Yeah. That feeling of tranquility that comes from living with reason and virtue.
So happiness comes from virtue,
It's the reward for living a good life.
but it's not the goal of virtue.
Good catch. He thought virtue was its own reward, the highest expression of our rational nature.
Bringing us closer to God.
Yes, according to his metaphysics, happiness is good,
Yeah.
but it's a consequence of doing what's right.
Okay, I see the distinction.
Okay, so we've got virtue as the supreme good, and happiness is what happens because of virtue.
Right.
Where does the final end fit in?
Yeah, that's what I was wondering.
Well, Descartes is a little vague here.
Okay.
He says it can be either happiness or the supreme good.
Hmm.
He uses this analogy where virtue is the target and happiness is the prize for hitting the target.
Okay. I like that.
So virtue is the path, and happiness is the feeling you get along the way.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And this is where Descartes is different from the ancients.
Okay.
He doesn't think virtue and happiness are the same.
Uh-huh.
He knows that good people can have hard times.
Right.
But he says even then they can still feel peace and contentment.
Like, there's living the right way.
Exactly. So virtue is its own reward.
Yep.
But it also leads to a kind of happiness that nothing can take away.
But how do we actually know what reason says is the right thing to do?
Right. How do we figure out what's good when we have to make hard choices?
Yeah.
That's the big question.
It is.
And Descartes doesn't really give us a clear answer.
Oh.
But he does give us some general principles.
Okay, like what?
In his letters to Elizabeth, he talks about the truths most useful to us.
Truths most useful to us.
Yeah.
What's that like? Some kind of Descartes 10 Commandments?
Not quite. They're more like truths that can help us approach ethical problems the right way. And you might be surprised that a lot of them aren't unique to Descartes.
Really? So what are they?
Well, the first two are straight from his metaphysics.
Okay.
The existence of God,
Right.
an all-powerful and perfect being,
Yeah.
and the immortality of the soul. The idea that our minds exist beyond our bodies.
Those are big ones.
They are.
How do those help us make choices every day?
Well, Descartes thought that knowing God exists could give us a sense of trust.
Hmm.
That even when things are bad, there's a good plan.
Right.
And believing in the soul's immortality could help us detach from worldly things.
to see things from a bigger perspective.
Yes, exactly.
So it's about perspective and trust.
Yes, trusting something bigger than ourselves.
To help us not be so selfish.
Exactly. Now, the next three come from his natural philosophy.
It's okay.
So his understanding of the physical world.
Okay.
The first is that the universe is huge,
Yeah,
and we're not the center of it.
it's true.
The classic Copernican shift.
Right, it's humbling.
And that's the point. Descartes thought it could help us stop being so egocentric.
To stop seeing everything in relation to ourselves.
Exactly. He called them vain anxieties and troubles.
Yeah, we cause ourselves so many problems.
You do.
So it's about our place in the universe.
Yeah. And feeling connected to everything.
What's next?
Okay, next is that we're part of a bigger community.
Okay.
A social whole.
Right.
And that the community's interests matter more than our own.
So balancing our needs with others' needs.
Yes, exactly. Remembering that we're all connected.
Yeah, we have responsibilities to each other.
That's right. Our actions affect everyone.
Makes you think about the impact you're having.
Yeah, so what's the last one in this group?
Okay.
The last one is that our passions can distort our perception, our emotions, you know.
Yeah.
Descartes thought they could cloud our judgment
Oh, yeah.
and lead us to make bad choices.
So we have to be aware of how our feelings are affecting us.
Yes, and try to see things rationally.
Because feelings can be misleading.
Exactly. And now, for the final truth. This one's a bit practical.
Right.
Descartes says that when we don't know how to act, we should follow the laws and customs of society.
Wait, really?
Yeah,
But I thought Descartes was all about questioning authority.
I know. It seems strange.
But it does.
But remember, this is part of his provisional morality,
Right.
his guidelines for when he was still working things out.
Okay.
He's not saying that laws are always good,
Uh-huh.
just that they can help when we're not sure what to do.
When we don't have that clear and distinct perception.
Exactly.
So it's like a fallback plan.
Yes.
When you don't have all the information.
Well, in real life, we often have to decide without knowing everything.
Yeah, that's true.
He thought it was better to follow some rules than get stuck in indecision.
So we've got these 6 truths most useful to us.
Right.
2 from metaphysics, 3 from natural philosophy,
Yes.
and 1 about following rules.
It's an interesting mix.
It is.
So how does this all work for living a virtuous life?
Yeah.
Is it enough to just know these truths?
Are they like a guide to what's right and wrong?
Well, this is where Descartes gets vague.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he doesn't give us like a step-by-step guide.
Hmm.
He seems to think that these truths will help us think the right way
Okay.
so that we'll naturally do the right thing.
So it's about character.
Yes, developing a good character.
Not just following rules.
Exactly, and this is where generosity is so important.
Right. He called it the key to all the other virtues.
He
He
did.
did.
It's like a big deal.
It is, and it's more than just being nice.
Okay.
Generosity for Descartes is about recognizing the inherent worth of every person.
Including yourself.
Yes, seeing everyone as rational beings with free will.
Deserving of respect.
Exactly.
It makes sense that that would be so important for him.
It does.
Because if we're all rational beings, shouldn't we care about each other?
That's his thinking.
So generosity isn't something we're born with.
Right.
It's something we learn.
Yes, he thought it started as a passion.
Oh, interesting.
A feeling you get when you think about free will.
And how much power it gives us.
So it's like realizing the potential of free will.
Yeah.
Not just for ourselves.
Exactly, but for everyone.
I see. And that sparks generosity.
Yes. But he didn't think it stopped there.
What else?
He thought that if we act generously over and over,
Okay.
it becomes a habit.
A habit.
Yes, a part of who we are.
Like building a muscle.
Exactly. The more you use it, the stronger it gets.
So the more generous you act,
Yes.
the more generous you become.
Exactly. It's a cycle.
And once that habit is there,
It's the foundation for everything else.
that's cool.
So how does generosity lead to other virtues?
Yeah, I can see how it could lead to kindness.
Right.
But what about like courage or justice?
Well, remember, there are two parts to generosity.
Yeah.
First, you have to understand that true worth comes from using free will well.
So not just having good intentions.
Right. You have to understand what's good.
And then actually do it.
Exactly.
Which is just virtue.
Yes.
It's like generosity is a meta virtue.
That's a good way to put it.
It creates other virtues.
And the second part is the resolve to actually do what's good, to
Mhm.
always choose virtue.
Even when it's hard.
Yes, that's where courage and justice come in.
It takes willpower
Yeah,
to do the right thing, even when it's risky.
exactly. And Descartes thought that once you have this inner strength,
Mhm.
all the other virtues come naturally.
It's amazing how he connects everything back to generosity.
Oh, I know. It's fascinating.
It's like generosity is the source of all the other virtues.
And that's what makes his ethical thought so compelling,
Yeah,
especially for us philosophers.
because we like to see how ideas are connected.
We do, and Descartes shows us how they're connected.
And the connection to moral universalism is so important.
It is the idea that all humans have equal worth.
Yeah, it's like Descartes saying, if you know your own value,
Yes.
you can't help but see that same value in everyone else,
Exactly.
no matter how different they are from you.
Right.
It's a powerful idea.
It is Descartes' thought that when you understand your own worth, you can see that same worth in others,
No matter what.
no matter what their status or wealth or anything.
That's what leads to moral action.
Yes,
It's a beautiful idea
it is.
that cultivating virtue can make the world better.
It can.
It's amazing how Descartes, who we think of as this like super rational guy, actually had such a nuanced view of ethics.
Yeah, it really is one of those fun paradoxes of philosophy.
Yeah.
You think of him as this cold rationalist, but then his ethics are all about human well-being, about character and connecting with people.
Yeah, he believed in the power of will,
Yeah.
guided by reason,
Yes.
to find true happiness.
It wasn't just about thinking the right things.
Right.
It was about developing good habits,
Mm.
dispositions.
Yeah, like building inner strength to
Exactly.
deal with life's challenges.
And what's so brilliant is that he takes that idea of virtue
Yeah.
from the ancient philosophers
Uh-huh.
and combines it with his own ideas about metaphysics and epistemology. It's all woven together.
It's a whole vision of the good life.
Yes.
And it's not just about yourself.
Right.
It's about responsibility to others.
Yes, that idea of generosity,
Yeah.
seeing the value in every person is so important right now.
It really is.
Yeah, in a world that feels so divided.
Yeah, so it raises a question, though.
Okay, what is it?
If these truths most useful to us are so general
Right.
and we never have perfect knowledge,
Hmm.
how much do we need to know
We
before
don't.
we can act?
Yeah.
Can we ever be sure we're doing the right thing?
That is the question, isn't it?
It is.
It's the tension between trying to know everything like Descartes wanted
Right.
and having to make choices without all the facts.
It's a real problem.
It is for everyone, not just philosophers.
Or anyone trying to live ethically.
Exactly, and I think Descartes knew that.
Mm-hmm.
He knew that in real life, we don't always get certainty.
Yeah.
So we have to learn to act based on what we do know.
And be open to changing our minds.
Yes.
So it's a balance.
It is between being sure of yourself and being humble.
Yeah.
And that's what Descartes gives us.
Okay.
A framework, not a set of rules.
Mm.
He wants us to develop reason to be virtuous, to act, and be willing to learn.
It's like he's giving us a compass, not a map.
I like that.
Yeah, he points us in the right direction.
Right.
But we have to do the work
We have to make the journey ourselves.
to become more rational, more virtuous, more human.
That's a good way to put it.
Well, I think that's about it for our deep dive into Descartes' ethics.
I think so.
We hope you found it interesting
Yeah.
and maybe even have some new questions to think about.
We always love hearing from our listeners.
We do.
So let us know what you think,
Yeah, you can find us on social media.
or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Thanks for listening.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.